But now we are talking pensions. Financial expert Peter Komolafe is here to share his secrets on how to get the most from your retirement fund. So you two, Grace, have you got a pension?
No. My question for Peter was, I've just been saving for a house and I can't afford to save for a house and pay
have
into
a
a
pension
pension
as well.
at the same time.
Okay.
So now I'm going to focus on it because I'm self-employed and I need the tax help, I think.
Well, we're going to get into that because I think a lot of self-employed people have exactly the same concerns that you have. Henry, you seem like the sensible man.
Look at the wise beard.
The wise beard, the sensible man.
Yeah, I've had a pension for the best part of, 30 or so years. I started working at the BBC in 1991 or 2, something like that. I can't remember exactly. And then obviously you would contribute, and the BBC would contribute to a certain level as well, up to 17.5%. And then when I went away and became freelance, then I had to get my own private portable pension, which I've been feeding the beast for a quarter of a century.
Sounds very sensible, Henry. Yes, very sensible. Peter, let's kick off. Which pension should we talk about first?
OK, so there are generally speaking 2 types of pensions.
Right.
So you may have, Henry, a defined benefits pension, which is effectively something called a final salary or a career average pension. Those are kind of like gold dust now. They don't exist anymore. You're very, very lucky to have one. Most people will have a defined contribution pension, and effectively what that means is your contribution into the pension is defined. So you pay in a certain amount every single month. That is then invested for you, and it's the total sum of money that effectively gives you the pot that you'll draw your...
So that's the defined contribution one, where everybody knows how much you're going to be putting in, and you kind of know how much you're going to get out at the end of it.
You don't know what you're going to get out. With the defined benefit, you know exactly what you're going to get out because the benefit is defined. With the contribution, you know what's going in. What it amasses to is down to how well it's managed and where it's invested.
How much control do you have over what it's invested in, how it's invested? That's none of your business. You just pays your money, they do what they want.
You have a lot of control. So a lot of organisations, workplaces will have these schemes where they will have a huge pension administrator look after it, and you have a choice of how it's invested. Generally speaking, people don't typically make the choice, and therefore it goes into a default fund. And I always say to people, be interested. Try and ask the question.
I don't do default. I meet my independent financial advisor at least once a year. We sit there and he shows me some complicated graphs. It tells me where my money is, how it's done. Am I happy with going into ethical distribution? Do I mind if it's going into arms sales? I don't want to go into arms sales. No, it's ethical but sustainable and with a return on my investment.
Yeah.
Now, what about someone like Grace, or people who are self-employed, who've never been in a position where an employer has been able to start a pension scheme for them? I mean, we all get our state pension, that's something on the side. But someone like Grace, someone like myself, self-employed, people who haven't started a pension, is this the type of pension we'd be looking at?
Yes, in short answer. I mean, I'm self-employed as well, so we're in the same boat. The beauty about it is, if you're running your own business, you're a director of your own company, you can start a pension very, very simply. I mean, you can use the NES system or provider. It's literally something you can set up literally tomorrow or today. It's very, very simple. I think a lot of people just struggle with what they put in.
What if you're a sole trader, like I am?
If you're a sole trader, you can still pay into a pension. You can use companies that are out there that will help you set up a private pension pot, and you don't have to commit to consistent monthly contributions. You can contribute into it as and when you want to.
Okay.
And also, Peter, before we move on to the next type of pension that there is available, a lot of the questions I get asked when we talk about pensions, people over 50 who don't have pension schemes other than their state pension. If you're over 50, is it still worth starting a pension scheme?
It is, yes. I mean, I'm really passionate about pensions. My dad died without a pension, so it's one of those things that I really believe in. I think one thing that is worthwhile knowing is that it doesn't matter what age you are, it's better to have something and to start on that journey than to do nothing at all. Obviously, the younger you are, the better it is. But because you're 50, I mean, you might be retiring at 65, so that's still 15 years. It's a long time.
OK. Let's move on to the next type, which is the defined benefit pension schemes.
Yep.
What about those?
So defined benefits, like I've already said, they are like gold dust. They're not really available anymore. But how these essentially work is, if you had a career in a business, for example, for an employer, they would calculate what your final salary is and give you a guaranteed pension for life based on your final salary at the end of your service there. And these ones are the ones that really everyone kind of wants. I missed out on one of these when I started working for NatWest many, many years ago. I didn't know what it was, but those are like gold dust. But anyone who has one is very, 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 very lucky indeed.
OK, let's take some questions because people have been calling in. Sue in Derbyshire. Sue, welcome to the show. What would you like to ask Peter?
My husband paid into a private company pension. Unfortunately, he died before he got to retirement age. The pension part or company pay me a small pension, but it's taxed. And I read an article that said if the pension pot is left without any withdrawals, it's not liable to tax.
OK. All pension income. So when you start to take income from a pension, that is taxable. But it really does depend on also what your personal tax situation is. So if you're getting an income which is less than the personal allowance, then technically speaking, you may not have to pay tax on that.
Right.
But generally speaking, when you take an income from a pension, it is subject to income tax as a whole. So it might be worthwhile maybe speaking to someone like maybe PensionWise, for example, just to kind of ask that question and explore what your personal tax threshold is, whether you breached it or not, and whether you should be paying the tax.
But basically, income from any pension is going to be taxed unless you're below the threshold. On this subject, though, as well, Sue is getting her husband's pension. This is something that a lot of people are confused by. Can you leave your pension to someone?
Yes, you can. So typically speaking, when you sign up to a pension, whether it be private or whether it be in your workplace, you'll be asked to fill in a nomination form.
Right.
And what that basically means is that you nominate who you want to leave that pension to. And you can leave it to anyone. You can leave it to cousins, aunts, wife, children. You can nominate. So that's the big misconception, that it dies with you. The only exception to that rule is if you were to purchase something like an annuity, for example. And sometimes they can have kind of spousal benefits, but sometimes they don't.
And they also, I think that there's this assumption that it's part of your will, which it isn't. You need to arrange that with your pension provider.
That's right, yes. So you will have a nomination of beneficiaries form specifically for your pension that you would fill in, and you express your wishes for what you want to happen to your pension if you're not available to obviously take benefit from it.
OK. Now, we're all about saving people money here. So recently there was a news story that was claiming that there is a kind of a nifty, and I'm always very careful when people go, oh, there's a neat little trick which is going to save you money when it comes to tax. Yep. That's sort of my spidey sense pricks up. I'm going, whoa.
Too good to be true.
Yeah, we're very careful of it. But this was the story, a nifty national insurance trick that could help you retire 3 years early. That sounds too good to be true.
OK, so this one's actually pretty good, and I've got a full breakdown tomorrow going up on my YouTube channel. But effectively, if you remember the autumn budget last year, November 22nd, was actually on my birthday, Jeremy Hunt announced that we're going to reduce the level of national insurance contributions for employees down from 12 to 10%, so 2% savings. What this is referring to is that for many people who perhaps don't need the extra money, so for an average person on the national minimum wage, for example, or average wage, that 2% reduction represents about £450 a year.
Right.
So if you don't need that money to cover your cost of living and you put it into your pension, that potentially has the ability to amass quite a bit of money, which could help you retire a little bit early.
Oh, so it is a nifty little trick.
It is it's a very, very nifty little trick.
OK, all right, who knew? Let's move on to Ken in Durham. Ken, welcome to the show. What would you like to ask Peter?
I've got my total pension pot's worth about 32,000, and my mortgage has got about 10 years left, and it's about 24,000 left. I'm thinking of just drawing it down, because I'm going to have to pay a tax on it, whether I'm getting as a pension or drawing it down anyway. So I'm thinking of drawing it down, paying my mortgage off, which will save me about £8,000 in interest over the next 10 years. And my main question is, am I better off getting all my different pensions and putting them into one and then drawing them down, or going to each individual company and just asking for it then, for obviously, tax workings and things like that?
OK, great question. I've got to be a little bit careful in how I answer this, because I don't know the full circumstances, Ken, that you find yourselves in. But I think it would benefit you to have a look at all of your pots, generally speaking, so you know exactly what your total amount is and decide from there. Paying off the mortgage is great because when you're retiring, having rent as a thing that you haven't got to pay for is a big equation in terms of your monthly expenditure. But at the same time, you want to make sure that when you take your pension out, you have something called the tax-free allowance. So if you amass £100,000 in a pension pot, for example, you can take 25,000 of that completely tax-free. Over and above that, you're going to start paying tax. So having an idea of what you've got all together will allow you to make a more informed choice.
Okay. And you think it is a good idea for Ken to focus on reducing that mortgage or paying off that mortgage and using some of his pension pot to do that? That sound...
It sounds like a
economics.
good idea. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea because if you're saving interest on your mortgage, then obviously that's money that you're not paying on the mortgage, but you do need to have a look at all things from a 360 point of view.
Okay. We've got a few more questions coming your way, but before that, 2024, you've looked around the pensions that are out there. Which ones would you recommend?
Okay, there are lots of pension providers, so I'm just going to reel off a few. You've got Vanguard as one of them, Fidelity, Best Invest, you've got Aegon, you've got Aviva, Interactive Investor. I think the main thing that you're looking for when you're looking at a pension provider, generally speaking, is the service that they're able to provide you, the range of things that you can invest in, so the choice that you have to put your pensions in, and also cost. I think if you look at the range of the companies that are out there right now, one of the ones that sticks out for me is probably Vanguard. They're very, very cheap. Indeed, some of the bigger boys, like I've just mentioned there, you know, Fidelities will actually buy Vanguard funds. So why not go to the guys who are the ones providing the funds to the big boys that play in that space?
So if you're shopping around at the moment, have a look at Vanguard, amongst others, of course.
Yes.
OK. Let's take another question. Heather in Warwickshire. Heather, good afternoon. What would you like to ask Peter? Heather, are you with us? No. OK, we lost Heather. A lot of people are asked the question sometimes about interest paid on their pensions. Oh, I think Heather is with us, and that is possibly her question. Heather, good afternoon. What would you like to ask Peter?
Well, bit of a backstory. I worked at a company that went into receivership and they were bought out, and they used another company to sort our pensions out. We were never told what companies they were looking at, or, you know, what benefits, what disadvantages there were. We were just told, which I won't mention the company, oh, it's your pensions are now with whoever. And I took a lump sum. You can take 25%, can't you? I believe it was 25% when I retired. And then the rest of my pension never, ever goes up. And I've been retired for 10 years, and I've never had an increase in my pension. I don't get it, actually. My husband's pensions, they go up every year, you know, and with the interest rates, there's been a lot of interest paid on that money, but who's got it? It didn't come to me.
OK. Heather, good question. Peter?
Really good question. So this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier on around the choice of what your pension is invested in. It's really important to note that interest rates that you get in the bank aren't necessarily related to your pension. Your pension is invested. So it may just be, Heather, that where your money, your pension pot is invested, just isn't performing too well. So it may be a case of pick up the phone to the provider, have a conversation with them to look at what options you have. You've got to be mindful that if you go for something else, obviously there's risk when you invest. You've got to bet, you've got to balance that will, if you will. But it's worthwhile having a conversation to find out where it's invested, to see if there's any other choices that might help your money grow a little bit more.
Grace, now you've got a little bit of info. Are you thinking more about getting a pension?
I am, and my question is, as someone that's self-employed, to help me pay less tax, can getting a pension help with that?
Yes, it can. So if you run a business, for example, you're a director in a company, your pension contributions are an allowable expense, so it can help you reduce your corporation tax effectively. So yes, it can help you. I guess the big question for you is who you're going to use. Are you looking at providers, that kind of thing?
Well, would you recommend a financial advisor for someone in my position?
100%. A financial advisor will help you make a decision based on your circumstances right now. You'll have a bit more of an informed decision and a conversation that will centre around that, so they can definitely guide you for sure.
OK, good. Well, look, Peter, thank you. Always good to see you. Always very well explained. Thank you for your calls and your messages as well. Look, still to come.